We are back, and this portion we are going to kind of flip-flop back and forth, and then really kind of open this up. We had 3 questions that came in from our congregation that we really want to talk about and address. So we're going to start off with open communication, right? So just as we ended, we said, communication is key. That's one of the biggest things when it comes to marriage, and I always liked. Someone had told me this once, and I always took it to the hills. They said, you can say one phrase, and it would mean something so different from a man to a woman. And the phrase is, I have nothing to wear. So if the husband says, I have nothing to wear, okay, in his mind, he's basically saying, I don't have any clean clothes, right? He doesn't have nothing to wear. Now, if a woman says, I have nothing to wear, that means to her, I have nothing new to wear. So we can just see how different our minds work and how it operates, that I think a lot of times we just don't take this into account when we are communicating. And this is one of those things that even earlier when we talked about the verse in 1 Peter 3:1, and it says, that we need to just be gentle and quiet spirits as well. You need to have that where, the wisdom to sometimes slow yourself down, calm yourself down, even if it's, I used to always, my husband used to always tell me, just go in your prayer closet for a second, just go in there. It's just having moments like that where you know that you're real, your emotions are real. But there's things that we can do. And with communication, one of the biggest things I always say is open it up. You need to be able to have the rough talks. So this is some of the things too that we will talk about in some of the marriage counseling for the younger couples, because they need to understand that, when you become friends, ever before you're in a relationship or ever before you're married, a lot of times you'll share things with each other that you really wouldn't believe that you would share. You're like, wow, he would say that? Oh, and she's not offended. But then a lot of times when the marriage aspect comes into it, you can say the same thing you probably said 5 years ago, and your wife will be like, oh, that's how you feel? And then it's a problem. So we just need to understand that the rough talks, the rough situations, as bad as it gets, as bad as it may seem, it needs to still be open. It still needs to be talked about. And those are the things that we don't realize, that in talking about those things, that's really where our healing is. Because a lot of times, whether it's, rough situations, there's been people in marriages that have been through adultery. You need to know and understand, hey, these are the things that need to be talked about. Things need to be put up front, because your healing is behind that. Just by not talking about it, it's not going to go anywhere. There's no wound. The best way I like to say is, when you get cut, there's the portion where you have to clean it, put the antiseptic on, stitch it up. That's not fun. It still hurts. But at the same time, that's the only way the wound can really heal, or else you're going to leave it wide open. So even in this process, a lot of people avoid that, but it's nothing that needs to be avoided. It's just something that you have to overcome, and you have to really dig into.
Another part on this is that I like to look at it like an onion. You really have to peel back the situation and really talk about it. In some cases, and it could be on both parties, where sometimes people will not want to go into real talk, or when there's a challenging situation, the other person can become very argumentative about it. And so what happens I'm just going to speak from the male perspective, is that as men, sometimes we don't want to dive in. The first thing one thing we don't want to hear is for a woman to say, we need to talk. Right? We need to talk. No, why? We don't, because we don't want to get into that situation. In some cases where, and like I said, it could go either way, but where if one person does not want to deal with something, then sometimes that person will develop to create an argument. Because now the other party may say, well, you know what, I just want to keep peace in the house, so I won't deal with it. But you know what? That's not really keeping peace. All you're doing is you're really putting dirt over it, or you're sweeping it under the rug. And what's going to happen eventually, it's going to blow up. And if we don't stop that, because that's important, somehow you have to become aware. Well, hold on. Why is it every time that we have a real serious discussion, then an attitude builds up? Well, a person could be doing that because of where they will, either party will utilize that because they don't want to dive in. Maybe, how they grew up. Maybe they just saw their parents arguing all the time, and then they say, well, you know what? I don't want to get into that. Well, you need to. You need to find out the source of everything. And even if, like Angela was saying, sometimes it could be something that could be, hey, it could be hurting. And it could be hurting to both parties, because normally in a marriage, when you hurt the other party, you're going to hurt too. It's just something that is just natural. It's just natural in marriage. But you think, well, if I don't have to talk about it, whew, all right, got away from that. We don't have to talk about it. No, you really do. And a lot of times in marriages, we don't. We will bypass things until one party is strong enough to say, you know what, we're going to talk about it. And if both of us get hurt on this here, like she was saying, we're going to find a healing balm. The Word is going to help heal this here, because we're going to, yes, let's tell the truth. Sometimes, what's the old saying? You can't handle the truth, right? But the thing of it is that we have been built for this. So you need to handle the truth, because if you don't handle it, it's going to come back and bite you. It is, because, it's a form of nature. Whatever goes around, whatever comes, it's going to come back around again. And God is bringing it back around for you to deal with it, the situation, so that way you can be honest with each other. That's about building a kingdom marriage. That's part of building a king. I didn't know that, but now you're discussing things, you're talking things out, and it helps. When Jesus had to deal with things, what did he do? He went to the Father. He took that time out to go to him and talk to him. And in some cases, the angels even had to come and comfort him. So this is all part of being real. Yes, you read a book, but sometimes the book can be Wonderland or fairy tale land. This is the way a marriage is supposed to be. Well, what happens is that I don't see this happening in my house. You may say, this is not happening in my house the way this book says it's supposed to go. You know why? Because you're not engaging in it, or you read this here, and then you'll find cases where, well, those, I'm going to put oil over my husband's side of the bed, and God's going to do the work there. You know what I'm saying? Or vice versa, right? Come on, Jesus, do this here. And the Lord is saying, hey, no, I will give you wisdom on how to deal with this situation. Let's be real with it. Yes, it's good to read the books. It's good to read the books, but then begin to apply it. Nothing just happens. You have to apply yourself. And as Christians, we will take the path of least resistance. Yeah.
So that brings us to one of the questions was, how do I forgive and overcome pain when my spouse has done something hurtful? So that's basically everything we just touched on right now. If we do not have the open communication, if you're not putting yourself in a vulnerable situation, and also, you know, your spouse in a vulnerable situation, for you both to be in a truthful setting, how do you really know what to pray for? Or how do you really know what to ask for? That's what I really, for myself, I found a lot of times when I didn't know everything that I felt that, you know, I should know for healing, how do you know what to pray for? Because it's not until that conversation happens that when if your spouse expresses something, you know, hey, this is how you make me feel, or this is how I feel, right? How do you know to pray for that until that comes out of their mouth? Up until that point, you're basically saying, I mean, you're guessing at what it is.
I like what you're saying there about being vulnerable, right? And what happens in cases where someone actually opens up and begins to share, because men, you know, if we open up and share something with you, and you bring that back on us, we've already opened up that door, but we will shut that door so quick. We will close it, because why? We open up to you, and you don't throw it back. It can be the same way if a woman opens up. You don't do that. The world does that, but as kingdom believers, you know, because we're going to talk about this here because there's a particular type of love that you have to have. So when a person is opening up to you, it's just like Christ, you know, he was stretched, right? Great love, you know. How much does he love us? He loved us so much that, you know, that Jesus just said, hey, he opened up. You know, Jesus was just real. He dealt with situations, and that's the same thing. Open up. So when someone opens up and begins to share, take it. Take it in. Ask God, you know, to show you wisdom, to how to respond to this person. Does that make sense?
Okay, and then that also, well, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, because this part, for those of you, this is so important, because how do I forgive and overcome pain when my spouse has done something hurtful? Well, the Bible clearly states about that love covers a multitude of sin. That's 1 Peter chapter 4, for those of you taking notes, 8. And it says, above all things, have fervent love for one another. For love will cover a multitude of sin. And I'm talking about, these could be things that are very hurtful, like, you know, you bring up adultery. You know, these type of things can be very hurtful, but so it really takes mature Christians, both husband and wife, to deal with this here, right? And so it says here, I brought up this point here because God says that I'm married to the backslider. God is saying that I'm married to the backslider. So what has happened in for God to say that? That means Israel has done something to forsake him. Israel has gone out to other gods, right? The greatest story you guys need to read, if you haven't read it, is the story of Hosea. I mean, God required him to go to marry a harlot. And it first started out really good. But then she was just hanging around. She was just like, hey, this is boring me. And she went out. But read the story. I'm not going to go into that, but this is part. We're talking about forgiveness. So God had to have a forgiveness for us. That's why he says, I am married to the backslider. That's in Jeremiah 3:14, for those of you taking notes. But if you can, please read the story of Hosea. Because you talking about love. That's love. This man went and his wife basically had gone and was with another man. And God told, go get her. Go get her.
One of the things about forgiveness is, number one, you have to be willing to forgive. And sometimes you have to pray, Jesus, help me to be willing to forgive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. like I said, that's where maturity comes in, and like we said, what the word says, you know, if a man lacks wisdom or a woman lacks wisdom, ask God, and know how to do that. But this is an ultimate situation here, what we're talking about, because sometimes it gets to the point, and we'll cover that, because we got another scripture that's going to cover that. But I just wanted to point that out, because that's really understanding love. That's a whole different love. A whole different love, you know, and this is something that you're willing to battle for.
And that's one thing that you always have to keep on the forefront in your mind during these things is, what are you fighting for? I know a lot of times with other women when, you know, we've talked, and it's just one of those things where in the midst of everything going on, you can forget that part. You know, and to have that constant reminder of you're fighting for your children, you're fighting for all the things that matter, you know, your marriage, you are fighting for that. And that is of great importance. So keeping that in your mind on the forefront as well.
Yes.
All right, and then the next one, is divorce ever the answer to marital problems? So we have a couple of ways of going about this. So there's a few different things that I want to hit on with this, and you can interject as well. You know, with divorce, it's one of those things that I always say, that's what's in the natural. You know, and like we talked about, you know, communication and what we're fighting for, these are all important things. But we also need to put out there that, you know, and this is just the real, that, you know, people can marry a lot of times too for the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of elements that are out there now, you know, dating sites, different things where people are getting married for, you know, salaries and certain, you know, money and different stuff like that, we need to take all of these things into account. We also need to take into account that there are relationships and marriages that are out there where people are being verbally abused, physically abused. And so when we kind of look at this question, it's, we really got to understand the situation for what it is, and not kind of ignore certain factors and just go with, this is how it is, because there can be many different elements within that.
Yeah.
As well.
And let me just inject some things there. When we're talking about this, I like to look at it when it's gotten to the point of divorce. Really, it's really the absence of foundation. You know, people marry and not have an understanding of marriage, the purpose of marriage. In many cases, when we talk about a kingdom marriage, a kingdom marriage is totally different than just the regular marriage, because a lot of times with a regular marriage, it's more so self-happiness, and that's what people they focus on. You know, well, you know, I can marry and I can move to this place and I can have this nice house, and you know, I'm going to have so many amount of, you know, the amount of kids, and all of that is all about self-centeredness. Yes, does God want us to have happiness in our marriage? Yes, but the thing of it is that the two come together to realize, you know what, we married for a reason. You know, our marriage is really for expanding the kingdom of God. We want to be able to tap in, and you'll find people at all various levels of being able to come into ministry and to help in certain areas, where sometimes some people just say, you know what, I want to finance. You know, I just want to finance where people are going into foreign countries. I just wanted, you know, and you come together for that reason. Or you're coming together to say, you know what, as a church family, you know, we can help out in this area. We can help the kingdom of God, because that's when you're focused on that, then all these other things, like seek ye first, like I said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, right, and all of his righteousness, and all these other things will be added. So you're seeking God, you're putting everything, the purpose of your marriage is for kingdom building. Kingdom building, not yours. You understand what I'm saying here? So this is where a lot of times people don't understand that, and I'm even talking about in the Christian world. And you'll find, you'll find that sometimes people that are just seeking those type of marriage just for that type of happiness, you really find out you end up marrying the wrong person. Woo.
Well, there's times also when people marry that aren't with Christ or have been brought up, and then they make a decision to marry when they're not walking with them, and it can get messy.
Yeah, yeah, because the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing with the foundation is not there, and that's why it points out, as far as where, in Malachi chapter 2 verse 16, it basically says God, what, he hates divorce, right?
Yes.
See, so, but what happens is that foundation is not there because you've jumped into a marriage, and let's say you're in a Christian marriage and you mess around and marry the wrong person, because then you'll say, well, she wasn't or he wasn't like that when we first met, huh? I mean, because hey, let me tell you, just be honest. We all hide things, we show the best, we show our best, right? But what happens? What if you were to, like my daughter was bringing up about, through the counseling session, maybe you should start writing down questions, things that you want to hear that person. I'm talking about, let's just be real. Let's come out of la la land, right? Let's come out of la la land and say, you know what? I need to know this. I need to understand this, let's say, for example, well, we have children, we have, different, children coming from, a prior marriage and things like that. Well, let's discuss that. Huh? See, those are real. See, you can't just push these things back off because, oh, I'm just so in love. Right? You really can't. And what happens? It happens in Christian marriages. So, well, you're in the marriage now, so let's see if we can make it work, right? Well, how are we going to make it work? Well, we're going to have to make it work because we're going to have to dive into the Word of God. We're really going to have to dive in. We're really going to have to begin to work through some things. We're really going to have to talk about it. That's why I'm talking about peeling it back. Just like the onion, there's layers there. And every last one of us, we come to the table with luggage. We do. There's baggage there, right? Well, you know what? Why don't you get together and say, you know what? Why don't you, let's open up our luggage. Huh? Hey, if you really want this to work, you're going to have to do that. Because, later on, you'll be like, oh, I got this, got 5 years into the marriage. Oh, I have this suitcase over here, right? And then you bring it out and, hey, I didn't know you had that. I didn't know you were into that. You see what I'm saying? So all of these type of things, and this is what I'm talking about being real. Because we will dress things up so much. I'm talking about Christians now. Christians, I'm talking about us now. We will dress things up, but we really have to be real with situations, or we're going to find ourselves in the same situation that the world is in.
So speaking about keeping it real, especially about divorce, I'm very curious about it because I believe that as a Christian, the word of God is always the final authority. And then
Right.
you quoted right, Malachi 2:16, but God says that God hates divorce. And then Jesus also spoke about it, and he was like, well, Moses permitted it because of the hardness of your hearts. But in the beginning, it wasn't so.
Right.
So although I know and I believe that the word of God has the final authority in every situation, I wholeheartedly agree with what you said about sometimes there are cases of like abuse.
Yeah.
And I have heard of cases where in the church, like people report abuses and then the only response they get is God hates divorce. Right, and for me, which I'm an attorney, so for me, it just throws me like, oh my God, this is like a lawsuit. This is like things are running through my head. I'm like,
Right.
this is legally not
Right.
right. So I'm just curious, as a church, like, where do we draw the line? Because yes, we have God's word and we know that God hates divorce, but then as you rightly said, there are things that are happening day in, day out, and it's kind of like, where do we interject? Where do we come in? Where do we draw the line? Like, because like my sister and I were talking about today, about we called it was one of our lady pastor's birthday, so we called to wish her happy birthday, and she was like, this is in Ghana. She was like, yeah, she spent like a whole day in the police station because it was like an abuse case, and then she took it very seriously because just a couple of weeks before, another abuse case happened, and the man actually ended up killing the wife. And then these things are happening in the churches, and believe you me, when they report cases, we quote the Bible and say God hates divorce, which we know is true. But then a part of me also feels like if you sit down and let someone beat you, and when you get to heaven, I'm sure God is going to be like,
Yeah.
Wasn't the right
Right,
way.
exactly. I'm pretty sure we could have solved this.
Yeah.
So my question is like, where God hates divorce, yes, but then in which cases are we like, okay, this is actually like not fine, this is not cool.
See, and earlier we had spoke on this, and that's why I say when we talk about divorce, I feel like it's more of a natural thing. But when you really go deep into it, you know, if you are going through the process of a divorce, 9 times out of 10, there's things that are happening. And as those things are happening, you know, it really comes back on you. What work are you going to put in, right? So just outside of the element, if it wasn't an abuse case and it's just a marriage, you have to do soul searching on your own, right? And a lot of times in that soul searching and in your praying, God will give you answers in ways of things that need to be done. But it's really, when you're married to somebody, everything is happening in the spiritual, right? Because it's the Trinity all over again. It's you two and him. So a lot of these things, when you're talking on this, you have to understand, even in these abuse situations, God will always provide a way out. You see what I'm saying? So that is why it's so important for us to be seeking him in these processes. You know, because there are some people that say, oh, you know, this is not a healthy situation for me, but they have done no work at all to restore their marriage, knowing that they're just walking away because they think that the grass is greener. So it goes both ways, that I think that we need to do more seeking of what God says than us trying to hear from somebody saying, oh, this is a divorce situation, right? Because a lot of times this is what is happening.
And sometimes it's God speaking that voice of you need to leave now,
Yeah.
because you've been choked and a child has been beaten.
Yeah.
Leave.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And see, in cases where, yes, and when I was saying, I wasn't saying it from the point, like, I know the old church would say, you know, and people, they stayed in those marriages. They stayed in those abusive marriages mainly because, you know, God doesn't like divorce. I'm just, overall, he doesn't.
Right.
But the thing of it is that,
everyone.
yeah, you know, but the thing of it is that, because why? Because one party is abusing. I think Miles Monroe said it best. He says, when the purpose is not known, then abuse is inevitable. So that's what's happening in a situation like that. If you're in a situation like that, then hey, common sense,
You gotta
you got to get out of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but what, from what I'm trying to convey here is that divorce is, when it's gotten to that point, it's, and I'm talking about from a perspective where, well, you know what, I'm just tired of it because, you know, he leaves the toilet seat up all the time. I just can't. I'm out of here. You know what I'm saying? But there's a lot of silly dilly things that will go on, maybe a woman see another man, or a man sees another woman and things like that. Those cases, no, but in situations, you know, because when it comes down to, like you was pointing out with the adultery, hey, you know, the situation is that, hey, you want to get out. That's your option to get out of it. But if you love the person and you want to work through it, then you have that option too. God gives you the option. You know.
There's just a lot more cases
Yeah.
these days that are coming up with a lot of other different elements too.
And I think through knowledge and education, you know, women are much, you know, more educated now, where back in the day that woman, you know, because she just stayed home and just had babies, and so now she's stuck in a situation like that. And some women live, 40 years in a marriage like that, but it's not right. It's not right. Okay.
All right, and the last question was, Pastor, I am a single believer. Should I go on a dating website to find a mate? So that one we kind of already.
I've got to tell a hilarious story.
Go ahead.
Because I had a friend that asked that question. I said, well, doesn't hurt to meet. If you find somebody, let me know. There's a guy I'd like to introduce you at my church if nothing works out. She meant the guy I was going to introduce her to.
Wow. Wow.
That's pretty
Wow.
unique.
But that is.
Good
Now,
stuff.
you can kind of say that is kind of God.
Right, it is.
There's some workings
that
in
just
there.
threw us off.
Yeah. Now, to this question though, what I really, what I was pointing out is that as a young believer, however, if you're single, whether you're a young believer or you're an old tree or however it is, the thing is that I believe that before you go off into this situation, you need to write down. It's almost just like the situation. I heard one pastor say that before a person would be able to marry his daughter, is that they had to write out a letter explaining why. Why is it that my daughter should leave from under my care to come under your care? Huh? So from that you look at the same thing, is that you have those, what the things that you believe for. God, I want this kingdom man, and let us sit down and let us reason together, right? Right? You reason together, you talk those things out. So this way, I think it really helps that you're not going into things blindly, because many of us, we went into situations just blindly, and that's not the way you're really supposed to go into anything, because God has everything already figured out anyway. Because that's how he operates. Well, you're made in his image, right? So those are things that you need to look into, what you expect from a wife, what you expect from a husband, and get into those questions, those things that maybe, because as little girls, I mean, you guys start preparing a long time before us guys started preparing. I mean, we was into what, store ball, all of these type of things. But what you had your little doll house, right? You had everything set up, all of your rooms, fellas, had all of your rooms. So they was already preparing for us. So you have to, and it's really important. It's really important for, to ask these things. And as men, it'll be really unique for a man to just, I've got these questions, but for a man to do that, that's good. But normally, are you going to find that? No. Why we got to talk about that? I love you. That's our way out. But don't take that. Don't take that, because we'll say things like that to be very evasive. And that's why I brought up the part about arguments. People will start an argument to be evasive because they don't want to deal with the real thing. And you have to deal with the real thing. If you don't deal with the real thing, then what's going to happen is that you're not going to be transparent with each other. Because once you get to a place of transparency, now you have reached a whole nother level in marriage. Because another thing too that I heard is that, when you get married, right, they have the unity candle, right? And then you have the other two. And then what happens, they come in, they bring them and they light the candle and then they blow theirs out. I heard one pastor says, hey, you don't blow that out. You don't blow those candles out, because you know why? Because each one of you are coming in, and each one of you have different personalities. And those personalities are to be there. You're joining up to become one. But the thing of it is that you still have your personality, and God gave that to you. God gave that personality to you, and the two of you coming together with those personalities, what's going to happen is that it's more so where you are complementing each other. You're complementing each other. Because if you blow your candle out, and then he blows his out, but then somebody is going to be more domineering in the thing, and then they're going to try to conform the other person. And God did not intend that, for that to happen. He did not intend for you to be what the other person wants you to be, because the other person is trying to conform you into them. So if you're trying to be conformed into them, then there's no need. One person is not real. And that's what happens in relationships, because we come to a point where we're not real. And that's sad in marriages. That's very sad. Because at that point now you're trying to find yourself. You hear people that, well, I just decided that I want to go find myself now. Right? So I think we've covered quite a bit. Any other questions?
Yeah, when you were talking about the wife and the husband cleaning a room, and then she's off to another room before, he's more than happy to let her go, so he don't have to deal with what he's got. So when she says let's go, he says okay. That's just like Adam and Eve when Satan came to Eve.
Yeah.
Adam should have stood up and said no, we're not
Right.
going to do that.
The Bible does say Adam was with Eve.
Right. But what I'm saying is that, but the thing of it is that Adam should have spoke up.
Yeah.
Because God had spoken to him. He was just standing there,
Yeah.
allowing, would you just stand there and allow, as a husband, would you just allow another man just come and just start talking to your wife? No. You just gonna stand there? Huh?
No.
Right. You see, so. So I hope you guys, but what's gonna happen now is that the campuses are going to go into, from this class, there's going to be, we're gonna be having, we got to get a computer. We'll talk more with you about that, with Gerard and everything's working on that, but they're gonna carry on where we're gonna be having these classes for like, I think about 4 weeks. So